Hi, my name is Sam Cusimano, and welcome to Electricity for Progress. Today, we will be exploring the FreePlay CM3. Similar to the FreePlay Zero that we had an assembly video for earlier, the CM3 takes a Raspberry Pi module and puts it on board a circuit board that fits perfectly into a Game Boy Advance shell. The completed FreePlay Zero kit came out really well in the last build, and you can see in there a Raspberry Pi Zero, W in this case with the Wi-Fi connection. So today, the big difference is we're going to be working with the Raspberry Pi compute module. So the FreePlay CM3 is a more powerful version of a similar circuit board that fits inside of a Game Boy case. And we're going to be modifying an aftermarket Game Boy Advanced case. I have all of the other parts associated with putting together a Game Boy Advance, the little silicone button pads, your regular gray directional buttons, as well as the little side bumper panels and the left and right shoulder buttons. And then for all of our tools that we're going to need today, I have up at the top here my handy Dremel tool. We're not going to have to use too much of the Dremel today, I think. We're going to really focus on using these flat cutters or angle cutters to just cut through the soft plastic shell. I also have a multi-tool that I always have around whenever I'm doing a project that has a knife and pliers and screwdrivers and things in it. I also have a small Phillips head screwdriver. I have a tri-wing screwdriver here also because there are some of these tri-wing screws that came in the kit with my Game Boy Advance. They're kind of like security screws. These can be replaced with other small Phillips head screws, for instance, but I have a tri-wing screwdriver, and so I'm going to just use the tri-wing screws that came with the enclosure kit. And then I also have two different colors of Sharpie markers. I use the Sharpie markers to mark the spots on the case that we're going to need to cut away, and it just provides a good reference point, especially when grinding things down with the Dremel tool. I also have a pair of safety glasses that I should be using today when I'm cutting the plastic, or certainly when I'm using the Dremel tool. So let's move all of this stuff out of the way and unbox the FreePlay FreePlay CM3. I also wanted to mention the Kickstarter campaign that was successful, run by Ed Mandy. I am a supporter of this particular Kickstarter, and now FreePlay has a store open where you can buy their circuit boards as a pre-sale once I believe all of the Kickstarter orders have been fulfilled. I ordered both a FreePlay Zero and a FreePlay CM3. Ed was kind enough to send me a CM3 module, which we'll be using today as a demonstration unit, as a gift, so just full disclosure. I'm really excited to build one of these CM3 units and see how much faster it is than the Raspberry Pi Zero, which is plenty fast to play most games, but it kind of takes forever to boot up, and it's very satisfying when you have a gaming system that turns on and boots right up. So let's go over here to the FreePlay CM3 box. Inside we have a nice piece of paper which greets us and invites us to go to freeplaytech.com/build, where there is lots of information. There's build instructions, and there's also all of the images for the for your SD cards for your Raspberry Pi, whether it be for the Zero or the CM3. Inside the box here we have some nice foam padding, and I had already opened this one, but here is the FreePlay CM3 board. Oh, and there is the Raspberry Pi Compute Module right on the back there. Very cool. Also in the box here is a Freeplaytech glass faceplate. This feels nice and heavy. It looks really, really good. I know that Ed was working on this, and there's always challenges in manufacturing things. I think looks from just first glance that it came out really, really nicely. Here is a little baggie with the templates which we're going to use for drilling out the holes in the enclosure. Also a set of little black button caps, so those are good. I can use them on top of the buttons themselves, and a little heat sink that we can put on top of the CM3 module, and of course a couple screws. Here also is the display module, which is the same display that we saw previously with the FreePlay Zero. Make sure you keep the little sticker protective film on there until we're just ready to lock it in the enclosure, just to keep that safe from scratches. Same thing with your glass faceplate. Just keep it all covered and safe until the last possible moment when we glue it all together, right? And that's going to be the first time that sticker should come off. Oh, speaking of stickers, there's little game stickers that come with it, and I also have some of these batteries. Ed sent me a pair of these. These are slightly longer batteries. They have a different set of LiPo batteries that fit very well into the battery enclosure section of the Game Boy Advance shell. These are a little bit bigger. I'll be demonstrating today with these larger batteries, and they're very inexpensive, so I'm going to pick up another couple sets of these to go with my, my other CM3 and Zero. All right. Let's take a look at what's on board this Freeplaytech circuit board. You can see a USB port on the far right. We have an HDMI port, a micro SD card slot, and a micro USB port. On each of the corners, there's a tactile switch for the left and right trigger buttons. These two tall poles are for the X and Y tactile switch buttons. This white strip here is, of course, the connector for the display unit. The speaker, you can see it's over on the side here. We have a nice wheel volume control for the onboard sound, as well as the audio output jack. You can see Freeplaytech etched in copper right there. That looks really good. As well, we have the copper pads for the directional pads and the A/B pads, and of course the select and start pads. On the other side of the board, we have the Raspberry Pi Compute Module, which looks just like an old DIMM of RAM. Seated in one of these multi-pin connectors, the Raspberry Pi Compute Module can be popped right out. I'm going to leave it in there for right now. You can see on the other side of the board here, there are the charging ports for the battery and the assorted circuitry for the battery charging. There's the power switch, which in this case is a soft switch. It's a little bit springy. And that's used to power on and off the Raspberry Pi and do a safe shutdown. You can get a better look over here at the volume controller potentiometer, which is a really, really slim unit there. We're going to need to modify the Game Boy Advance case that we have in order to access all of the different ports, as well as make sure that the batteries fit into space. But just looking here at the Freeplaytech CM3 circuit board, things are looking pretty good to start with. Now let's go in and check out our enclosure that we're going to modify. When you order an aftermarket enclosure for a Game Boy Advance from Amazon or eBay or from any number of other retailers, you can expect to have a variety of components that should come with it. There are these little rubber pads that go in between the buttons, and you can see there's little carbon bases on the bottom, and that's how we actuate the directional pads and the A and B buttons, as well as the select and start buttons. In this particular kit, the power switch here has been painted black, which is kind of interesting. There's also a little tiny piece for the light pipe for the LED, and this is going to go in between the circuit board and this little tiny hole right here for the LEDs for charging and power to show. We also have to make sure that we have the left and right shoulder buttons and the left and right bumpers in the right order. The top and bottom of the case come right apart, and usually there's a little plastic lens cover. These work just fine, but they get scratched up very, very easily, and we have a nice glass Freeplay Tech lens cover that we're going to be putting on at the end here. So yeah, we'll just keep that separate and push this one off to the side. You can see there's a little piece of metal inside of the base of the Game Boy Advance. As well, the battery compartment opens up, and we can put the battery door over here. We're going to be doing some modifications to the bottom here where the battery compartment is, also removing a lot of the plastic around where the cartridge normally goes in, and then we'll start to modify the top after that, where we have to do extensive cuts along the side where the speaker and the buttons are, as well as cuts in the front of the controller face in order to have the X and Y buttons come through in the right spot. We're going to have to do some other modifications to the inside front using both the circuit board of the CM3 as well as the display with the protective plastic still on it as a guide as we remove little bits of plastic here and there. So let's make sure all of our parts are well organized, don't lose any screws, right? And of course some of those screws might require a tri-wing screwdriver. So some kits, some shell kits come with a tri-wing screwdriver, many don't though, but I happen to have one of these in my assembly kit from working with other Game Boy products. So let's clean this up and start to mark up where we want to do cuts on the enclosure back and front. So now we'll use a small Phillips head screwdriver and remove this little piece of aluminum that holds in the Game Boy games when they're inserted into the shell. And we'll keep those little screws and put them to the side because you can never have too many little screws, especially when putting together electronics projects like this. We'll probably get to use them later. And we'll just put the piece of aluminum to the side. I don't think we need to use this for anything else. All right. Now I'm going to get out a black marker here and just make some marks on both the top and the bottom module here to show where we want to make some of our cuts. This is also not just to show you, but this is how I work when I'm going to cut something apart. I want to mark off everything that I need to cut away. That way I know when all of the parts that I've marked off with magic marker have been removed, then I'm done. So here we want to remove all of the surround right on the game case, and we want to make sure that there's a little tiny bit at the top. I don't want to damage too much how it looks when the cartridge is inserted because that's going to be an opening where the Raspberry Pi will have a little bit of airflow perhaps so it can breathe, and but just people can see inside of that. All right. And then, so that means I'm going to cut all the way down to here. Get rid of all of that. And get rid of all of this. All right. Pretty good. Now, for the top, we've got a lot of different things we're going to need to do here. But to start off, I know that I'm going to have to cut this entire long strip here. As well, I think we're going to have to cut out some of the speaker enclosure. And then I think we need to cut a little bit of these two little guys, little tabs that stick out there, but we want to preserve them as much as possible, as that's where the right or I guess left button, shoulder button is going to be pressed. Then around the base here, we've got a whole bunch of little corners that should be removed. And there's this really thin ridge that runs along the entire case, which we should try to scrap off a little bit of. All right. Now there's also going to be some additional spots that we need to cut apart here at the top based on where the Raspberry Pi CM3 module, how the board all meets up with it. So let's bring over the FreePlayTech CM3 board, right, and see how it would fit just, you know, loosely placed on top of there. So you can see we're going to have to make some cuts for where the left and right shoulder buttons go, but it actually looks like they're going to fit in there pretty well. And then you can also see that these long poles that are right here and here, they're going to need to be cut off, and we're going to need to make a little trim for where the SD card slot is, and obviously we need to make a big cut for where the USB module is. But we'll take it one step at a time, I think. Let's focus right now on cutting apart the back unit here, and then we'll look a little bit at how the batteries are going to fit in and try to make some cuts associated with fitting these specific batteries. So now I'm going to just take my angle cutters here, and these are nice sharp ones. They're not all torn apart from cutting big pieces of wire or nails or anything. These are pretty fresh, and I'm going to use these to make kind of bold cuts in the plastic here, and you can see how soft it is as I'm making these cuts. It's easy to trim some plastics, and actually some more than others. Different injection molding processes and different types of plastics can be more fragile or brittle than others. There we go. And so you'll have to just see which exact kind of plastic your specific after-model shell is made out of. I've had very little trouble cutting these shells either with clippers like this, or an X-Acto knife, or my Dremel tool, which I'll use here in a second to trim up. Okay, here now let's get out my multi-tool, and just using the pliers, pry out some of those pieces of plastic that are cut. All right, so most of that's gone. I can trim that up with the Dremel tool also. Now let's make some cuts on the other side. All right. Ooh. Now that's a good reason to be very careful. Flying bits of plastic. I should be wearing those protective goggles right now because you don't want to cut something and have it fly at you, which happens very often when you're working closely with little pieces of plastic. All right. So I don't think it has to be completely flush to the bottom, but I'm going to break out my Dremel tool here, and we'll actually cut it all the way down until it's a nice, relatively smooth finish on the base of the enclosure right there. So let me grab this Dremel tool, and you know what? I'm going to be a good sport and actually put on the protective glasses. Sorry if it gets a little loud while I'm doing this dremeling. I'll try to take down the audio in post-production a little bit. All right. And as I always like to advocate, try to keep your workspace relatively clean here as you're cutting plastic. Okay. There, that's pretty good. I think both sides are trimmed down nice and flush. And we can pop the whole unit in there. See how it feels, see how it fits. Yeah. And you can see in the back there, the compute module has a lot of space to breathe. We'll be able to pop a heatsink right on there. Okay, so next we also have to take out a little bit of plastic here at the base of the battery case. I think there actually needs to be a large amount of plastic removed at the base of the battery case for the batteries that I have. These batteries are a little bit longer than the battery case is itself, and you definitely don't want to put pressure on LiPo batteries. They should sit, nicely, safely, snugly, but not tightly ever. You really don't want to puncture one of those somehow. That's just flames that'll shoot out of the little box. Not an ideal scenario. So I think what I need to do is also remove some plastic over on this side, this fin here, and I think some of this square module there. Should be enough to then have access for the two battery points on the CM3 board. In order to accommodate these longer batteries, we're also going to need to modify the inside of the battery case. So right here, this entire fixture needs to be removed, as well as these little aluminum tabs that hold the batteries in. We're going to need to cut off this fin ridge that's in the middle, and I believe we're also going to want to trim off this fin that sticks up in the middle right here. Now we'll use our angle cutters again and cut out some of these pieces from the inside of the case. And after I make a couple cuts, I use a pair of pliers just to pull out the chunks of plastic. And then, of course, we'll come back in a little bit with a Dremel tool and clean up all of those edges. So let's start cutting apart this module. And again, I think we have to remove all of that wall, and this entire aluminum piece is going to have to come out also. I think that it's going to have to really even cut into the inside of the case a little tiny bit just in this corner to make sure that there's enough room for the entire length of the slightly longer batteries. If you had the other batteries that Ed is selling, I believe, then you would only have to make half these modifications, but still have to make sure that the battery case is nice and accessible for these LiPo batteries. I think also it's an option. You can use one or two of these batteries, or pretty much whatever combination you want, and that'll be able to give you more or less battery life depending on the costs associated too. All right. And just as an example, I'm just going to test fit this battery in here, and you can see that he's still a bit too long. I'm going to need to make some serious trims over here in order to fit the entire guy into the space. Let's see here. I'm going to take out my marker and mark up a little bit more here just to remind myself of everything that I want to take out. I think I need to take this out too. Okay, here let's also hop over to the other side here and trim out these little pieces while we're at it, just because they're easy. Okay. All right. So now let's try to trim up all the inside parts of the shell here. Get rid of a little bit more of this battery case. All right, and while again, I'm sure that this could be done with an X-Acto knife or any other blade, different hardnesses of the shells are going to give you different results, so always be careful. I am going to go to my Dremel tool now, where I know I can do a little bit more aggressive damage, or I mean deconstructive work on the shell precisely with the tip on this, which is really just, I don't know, maybe a 5 or a 6 millimeter standard drill bit, nothing fancy. Okay, let's take a little break, get cleaned up here, and see where we're at. Okay. Also coming back in with some cutters at the very end can help slice off little tiny pieces or leftover burrs that are from the Dremel tool. All right, let's see here. I want to try and fit the circuit board again. So the whole process with building any of these devices is really, putting it on the enclosure, pulling it back off, seeing how it fits. Okay, let's see here. Okay, everything, so it's really, really a pleasant build. I think that Freeplay Tech has done a great job. The board fits so well with just a couple modifications, and you can see the battery packs are pretty much accessible. I might have to cut a little bit out. Let me just mark that while it's in there. Cut a little bit out of here to make sure it's easy to plug the battery in and out, but otherwise it just fits so well in there. We're not going to have a hard time at all, I think, getting all of this to work really, really sweet. Ooh, and actually feeling the tactile switches on the left and right buttons. They're actually nice and soft, actually. Different than the ones that are on the Free Play Zero, or the one that I have, which have a slightly different tactile click to them. I don't know. I think, but they feel rather pleasant. I'm excited to try and play a couple games on this. All right. So we know that fits. Okay, so let's try to cut a little bit more out. So the battery connector can fit in there. Okay. And wiggle off any chunks in there. All right, now let's try to seat a battery in there. Still a little tight. Still a little tight. I think I just need to take out a bit more, just in the back corner there. Perhaps I should just take out everything in this back corner here. All the way down there, all this crap or stuff here. That might help a whole lot, because I just don't want to really ruin everything up on the front face here where the other connector points are, yeah, unless I have to. But again, these are the quote-unquote discount batteries that FreePlay Tech is offering, and they have smaller ones that don't require all these extra cuts in the battery pack. But I should be done with this in just a couple more Dremel cuts. Okay, and now we just need to make a couple more cuts to clean up the inside of the box. This is taking quite a few passes, but that's also the nature of this kind of process. You know, make a few cuts and then see how the device fits in. Seems like that the battery's fitting pretty well, but we need to fit two of these batteries stacked on top of each other in there, and I want to give it a little bit more wiggle room, as it were. So here, let's pop our goggles back on and make these hopefully last few cuts in the battery box. and it looks pretty good in there. So let's try one more time to slide, and I'll pop the connector cable through, through one of these holes, and it seems to sit pretty well, yeah, in the bottom of the battery box there. So let's grab the second battery and slide it through that same hole just for temporary holding. And it sits on top of it pretty well. Looks like it's going to be a tight fit, but let's take the battery cover. Click. Perfect. So as you could see, these are the discount batteries that are being offered. It just takes a little bit more effort to clean out really essentially that one corner and the entire back end of the battery box. But then these little tiny LiPos fit in perfectly. Excellent. And so hopefully that's most of the changes that we have to make to the back of the enclosure. We might have to do some more work here at the edge where all of the ports go, but we'll work on that in a little bit. Now let's move over and take a look at the top of the enclosure and the cuts we have to make in order to manage the screen and the display, the buttons, and all of the new XY button components. One more thing that I noticed just a second ago while test fitting the board is that everything looks like it fits really, really well. The volume knob and the headphone jack look like they fit very perfectly into their little slots. But the volume knob is a little bit off-center, I think, and so it's hard to spin. What I think I need to do is just trim a little bit of the plastic around the entryway to where the volume knob would normally sit, and to accommodate the slightly larger, I suppose, volume potentiometer that's being used. So I'm just going to go in there with these angle cutters and just trim out the tiniest bit from both sides of the volume knob just to make it, you know, consistent. Okay, and now let's pop that guy back on there and just see if that makes all the difference. See, the buttons fit, everything else seems to line up. Yeah, actually, you know what? I cut a whole lot off the one side that I didn't need to, and not enough off the other that I did need to. So let me pop that guy back out and do one more heavier cut here on the far side. All right. And there we go. Now the volume knob turns nice and freely, and the case doesn't actually rub against anything. So that's all I'm going to do, I think, to the bottom of the case for now. We'll come back to the bottom in a moment. Now let's focus on the top of the case. So we already did a little bit of marking up on the top of the case, but I also already know that we're going to have to take off these standoff poles also. Just mark those up. Okay. And see, looking around, I'm not going to even try to test fit the display module, which I have sitting back here, until we make some of these other cuts into the top of the case, because it's definitely not going to fit as it's currently laid out now. And if we just try to sit the parts in place, most of the components still are going to be rubbing against these long areas and some of the other side here. So let's go back, put on our protective glasses, and start trimming up some of these tabs on the board. I think I'm going to have to jump in with the Dremel pretty quickly, but I can get rid of those two. Oops, real easy. Now to cut along the edge here, the entire side where the A and B buttons and the speaker cage is, I tend to just make some vertical cuts along the edge. This will take some of the stress off the whole case as you're making cuts, because as you're cutting through the plastic, if you take off a really big piece or something that's going to put a lot of strain on the plastic, it's going to bend and flex as you make your cuts. So giving it some points to break off is really going to be ideal for the entire rest of the enclosure. Okay, and then now that I've made some vertical cuts, I'm going to make one long horizontal cut across the back. And it's pretty clean. Well, no, I'm lying. It's horribly jagged, and I'll have to clean this up with my Dremel tool in a few moments, but that went pretty easily. Now, I know we are going to have to trim out parts of the speaker box, so I'm going to just start with that now. Just taking out this bit of the speaker enclosure that's right next to where the display is going to go. Okay, now in this top corner here, I want to be kind of careful as I'm supposed to retain these two vertical tabs which hold in and give you resistance on the shoulder button, but it's really kind of a hard thing to do, and I've messed it up only once building one of these enclosures. There we go. So the idea is just be careful. All right. And I will get all this to the very bottom using the Dremel tool here. Let's see if there's anything else that I can just cut with these clippers. Maybe these little angle pieces here at the bottom. I could just cut with these clippers. There we go. All right, and the same over here. Okay. And then this low line that goes all the way around the perimeter of the face, that needs to come out in order to not put too much pressure on the display once it's actually fitted inside, because the display will be sitting right against the plastic right there. So let me actually go back over with the marker where all of this is going to need to be dremeled off just to make it nice and smooth. We can also do a little bit down over here. But I think we have enough of this off now that we can take the display module and just, kind of play with it for a second, see how it fits in here. The cable side goes towards the A and B buttons. And I can already feel that this fits in a whole lot better, but not perfectly. You can see up at the top here, I need to take out a whole bunch from this, this whole section. And the display is going to sit all the way back against this far wall, so I might need to take a little bit more off of right here in order for that to sit properly. Of course, remember I've got the safe plastic on there. Still keep that on whenever you're playing with your display at all. Okay, so yeah, that top corner needs to come out. And hopefully everything else around those buttons will be fine based on those trimmings. Okay. So I'm going to go at this with the clippers again. Go all the way down. Come back with my pliers to pull out the little bits. Go back with the display again just to make sure I have all the main spots cut down. It looks like everything associated with that pin's gotta go. That's gotta go. Alright. It's more than I thought I was going to have to cut out this time around, but I'm going to just go for it, not be ashamed. Come back, clean it up later, right? And of course, if one of these enclosure cuts messes it up, they're only, $5 or even, $12 for some fancy colors. These cases come through Amazon so they can show up quickly, or through eBay. So even if I mess this up horribly, I think I'll be able to clean it up, or at the very worst order another one. So let's use the Dremel tool again and finish off all these black lines and see where we are, if we can seat the display in there. Now let's fit the LCD display in one more time, seeing that there isn't any pressure on the display, but that it sits all the way in the bottom here against the enclosure, and that's what it's going to look like from the other side here. Pretty cool. I think that we're in really great shape. Looking closely around the edges, it seems like there's nothing that's really pushing or prodding at the display. It looks like it's going to fit in there just all right. And once it's all fit in place and we've tested it, usually I'll throw a dab of hot glue at the bottom just in order to hold the entire piece in place, even if it gets, jostled around in normal use. So let's pull out the display here again, and let's bring the CM3 board back into the picture. We're going to want to try and just seat everything real quick to see how it, see how it goes. You have the speaker on these little wires. It's a little bit of a game to fish them around and get him to sit in the little speaker hole, but it's quite doable. Now, as I play around, I can see that the next step is going to be to cut the two holes for the A and B, or I mean the X and Y buttons above the AB buttons. So we can pass that all the way through the shell, and then we can start looking at any other modifications we have to do for each of the input-output ports at the top of the board. So let's see. Let's go back over. Freeplay Tech included this little handy guide, which says ABXY on one side and flip over stop on the other, so you can make sure you use only the correct side. And what we're going to do is I want to grab the little rubber button pads and the A and B buttons and slide them into the enclosure, right? So the little rubber pads will sit on top of these poles, and that just allows the A and B buttons to be held in a little bit. So the A, of course, on the outside, the B is on the inside here. So now what we can do is take our guide, right? Sit that on top of the A and B buttons, and then this gives us a spot that we can mark in order to make the cuts for the X and Y buttons. This is by far the hardest part of the entire process, not because of the skills that's required in order to cut these holes, but because of how picky people feel about how the face of their Game Boy is going to look with these buttons. So be very careful when you're doing this part of the whole process. I hold the buttons up from the bottom so it feels like they're nice and sturdy, and then you wiggle the PCB around this template made out of circuit board, actually, which is a pretty cool idea. And I think that's the right spot. So here now I'm going to reach over, take my marker, and here I have a finer tip marker than that Sharpie, and like you can see, there's a lot of wiggle room here, so you really gotta kind of feel it out. Where do you really think the X and Y's should be, because they are logically placed? So I'm going to put one dot there, one dot there, and those will be our guides in order to cut the X and Y pilot holes for that on the circuit board. So I'll take the rubber off the back and pop out the A and B buttons, and we will throw on our glasses again and cut through real quick and see how close and accurate we are. This drill bit is, like I said, 5 or 6 millimeters, so it's going to be a pretty close fit for these tactile buttons as they cut through, so I shouldn't have too much wiggle room once we make our first cuts. Alright, so I'm just really cutting some piloty holes in order to then look through the case here and see how accurate it seems like we are getting, because then we can see the buttons through those holes. Yeah, I think that we're going to be in pretty good shape there. I just need to widen them out, and we should be able to slide them right through. Okay, let's see, they slide through there, almost, let's see, looks like there's just a couple little things on the board here that might be holding it out. Here, let me again clean up my workspace. I always want to have a clean workspace. And we'll see, I didn't do a great job with that top hole. Looks a little off center. When I flip it over, you can also see, oh, I'm really close to this structure on the other side here. Let's see how far off I really am. It's actually looking like I'm pretty much straight on with those buttonholes. The next things we're going to have to do are really make all these big cutouts for the USB port and things like that. But I think for right now, these holes are pretty good. I'm going to just maybe round this bottom one, or this one out a little bit on the bottom to make it more circular, just so I'm happier with it. But in the end, I'm going to go back and make the holes wider in general and use little button caps like this. So I shouldn't really fret about it too much, but yeah, just do that real quick. There we go, I feel a little bit better. And hopefully that should test fit pretty well in our next step. Okay. Now next, I believe that there's these little tabs right here where the shoulder buttons go, and I'm pretty sure that I need to trim the tips of those tabs off. And by setting the board on there, actually, whoa, it looks like that one went right in between where the shoulder button goes. That's kind of cool. So I could still see that my X and Y buttons fit in pretty well, but there's a couple other things that have to come out for the USB port. But yeah, wow, those little tabs that I just marked don't have to be cut at all. They have little cutouts already in the circuit board. That's really kind of smooth. All right, so here, let's make a few changes here to the way the USB connector, the HDMI connector, and the USB port work on the back here of the face of our enclosure. So let's make some markings here for our USB port. Definitely it's going to have to be within those lines. And it looks like not only are we going to have to take out the material here on the inside of the enclosure, but we're probably going to need to take a slice off the back. I don't think it has to be very deep though. Just a small slice like that should go through. But yeah, we're going to need to make sure we take out quite a bit of this piece. Now, luckily, the HDMI port that's right next to it fits really well into the EXT port gap opening. So I think that's going to be really kind of clever as they slide together. And we'll have to make some modifications to the bottom of the enclosure so it fits right. So let's try to make a couple cuts with our Dremel tool for the back of the USB port. Okay, that looks pretty good actually. We'll clean this up a little bit with a file or with a razor later on. Let's see how that fits in here. Slide those buttons into place. Oh, looks like I'm a little bit off to the one side. Let's center all this together again. And yeah, definitely I'm off to the side, so I'll have to make some cuts in the back a little bit stronger, but I can see what I need to cut here now. We'll do this guy over here, a little bit of that right there, and then definitely that tip there. There we go. So now we can see that the X and Y buttons fit very well in their positions, and we've gotten most of the way here with the USB port, but there's a little bit more trimming to go. Over here on the other side, I can see the board fits in really well. There's a couple small standoffs that might be holding us away from the board when we actually want to be touching it. Here, let me try and move a couple things around here, and we'll get some cutouts associated with the other ports also. Well, now I'll make a little trim right here for the USB port, for the micro USB charging port, and then we'll make some more cuts over on the side for the full-size USB port. All right, that's looking pretty good. So we have the USB port over there. It's fitting pretty tight in there. The main USB port, I'm still getting a little bit of tension over here from something or other. Must be a part of the back wall of that case. Have to trim some more off there, I guess. Same thing, I think, for right around the USB port. So maybe I'm just going to have to take out all this. Go down another couple millimeters. And then I guess take some of this off too. Just to make sure that we don't have any conflicts with the board itself or to put too much pressure on the board. Again, all of this is iterative as I hold the board into the case and see, how does this particular enclosure work? What has to come apart for this particular enclosure? Okay. Let's go in there with a screwdriver a little bit and take out any chunks. All right. So, everything's looking pretty good. feel like there's a bit of pressure somewhere on the board. Something's coming into contact. Maybe it's still more of this whole wall. I guess I should take more of it out. So let's draw that out and cut it out. Alright, pop this through. There we go. Alright, that's fitting in pretty nicely now. And I think that we can move on to the next step where we're going to be seating more of the parts, looking at how the display fits in again, and then also making sure that we have the back half of the case modified for all of the ports. I have the main circuit board in place here, and everything fits nicely in the front. Now I have the back of the enclosure, and we'll pop that into place, and you can see where I already have marked in black on the back of the enclosure where the USB charging port needs to be cut out, a little bit for the SD card slot, a little bit for the HDMI port, and then of course also a bunch needs to be cut out for the full-size USB port. And then you can also see on the inside here for the full-size USB port and the micro-charging USB port, we're going to need to pull off some of the more material that's on the inside of these two little divots. So let's pull out the Dremel tool and make a couple cuts on the back, and then this should help us mate up perfectly to be able to completely close the shell. bit more trim up work to do, but I think most of the big chunks have been removed. Now let's just try to pop it back into place and see how much more work we have to do. Okay. So over here by the USB port, I think we should definitely trim off a little bit more from this side. The SD card slot's looking pretty good, but we're definitely going to want to touch that up a bit. The HDMI port definitely has a couple more trims that we need to do, and that should be fine. And then the main USB port looks like it could be squared off. All right. Let's go back for our second pass. Okay. Use our fingers to clean off a little bit of the burrs here. And as you can see, I'm using a higher speed in that last pass on the Dremel tool, and it makes a whole lot of different shreddy bits. Each different speed and type of drill bit that you use with your Dremel tool is going to give you different cutting results, different amounts of mess, or different size chunks of plastic that are your waste product. All right. And now before we fit the back on one final time, I think everything's going to line up nicely. I forgot to take out this one piece in an earlier stage. It's just a little tiny standoff that holds the board up, but I know that this is going to get in the way. I think it'll get in between our button board here and the Raspberry Pi module. So I'm just going to get in there with some clippers, clip it off. And I think that actually might do it. As long as it's not full height. I don't think it's going to interfere with anything, but let's see. Slide the back, the enclosure together. Yeah, everything's fitting together really good. Shoulder buttons seem to work. Make sure that you've got the speaker situated and the wire routed nicely. And yeah, I think this is coming together really well now. Maybe a couple more small trim cuts along the edges here since it all looks a bit rough, but I intend to use a file to file it all down before it's all finished. Alright, I think we might be able to try popping in the buttons and the display now. We're well on our way to getting this FreePlay CM3 in its enclosure. Now let's take the LCD and plug it into the main board on the CM3. There is a little dark brown or black bar that sits at the end of the connector that you must pull out slightly. Then you slide the ribbon cable into the connector. It should not take too much force. You don't want to wiggle it, and you definitely don't want to wiggle the screen too much, or the display portion of it. Alright. Once you have it inserted, then carefully squeeze together the little tabs on the side so that black bar comes in a bit closer to the white connector, and that is our friction connection. Okay. Now, we'll pop the board out of the rear enclosure. And now let's try to seat the LCD in place along with the board. So, we'll gingerly place the LCD in the square, place the speaker in the speaker spot, and make sure you tend to the wiring. Wiggle your X and Y buttons through the hole, and and everything should set together pretty cleanly. And you can see there's a bit of space between the LCD and the back of the circuit board. We have some foam here that came in the package for the LCD, and what we can do is fold it up a little bit, put it underneath there, and that'll act as a little bit of support and a nice soft backing to hold the liquid crystal display in place. All right, that's looking really, really smooth right now. I think our LCD fits really nicely. Still, of course, have the display cover on the LCD. Now that we have that in place and we've already closed the back, I think what we can do is start arranging all of the pads and buttons. There are a couple little mods that we need to do to the left and right shoulder pads as well as the power switch. So with the power switch, you can see there's this little tiny nub on the bottom. We want to clip that off. The reason is we've changed the way that the power switch works. The power switch here is just using a spring and it's moving back and forth. We don't want it to like lock in place with that little nub. So that way, when we insert the power switch, it'll mate up with, there we go, it'll mate up with the switch on the board and it'll spring actuate rather than getting latched. Pretty clever. I like the button in black here. I think that's going to look pretty good. All right, besides that, we also need to look at the left and right shoulder buttons. So here, let's carefully pull everything out. And now let's try to line up the left and right shoulder buttons. So, left and right shoulder buttons are based on the way that it's the screen facing you. So the left is on the left, the right is on the right. It's easy to mix that up, so make sure you have them in the right spots when you start working with this. And then there's these little tension tabs that they're supposed to have. So the little spring action here will hopefully have a little bit of negative pressure. Now, it doesn't look like I've included enough of the tab on the A and B button side. I was warned not to take too much of that material off, but here on the other side we have a little piece of plastic wall that's going to hold that together. Here I'm going to now take the enclosure and try to close it off and just hold in to see if the left and right buttons fit into place well. So there's a nice springy touch on the left button, but there's not very much springy touch on the right one. Let's see. So we also probably want to try to do a full assembly. Let's take the little bumpers that go on the side and slide those bumpers onto the top part of the shell. The little divot in the one bumper that's used for a lanyard, that goes on the same size as the D-pad. So what we can do here is look at our circuit board, and we want to have our D-pad line up with these little rubber footies. And as you can see, there's a plastic pole on each side of the D-pad connector, so that helps us identify where the rubber pads go. Also replace the A and the B buttons similarly how we had them earlier when we were drilling out. And then we also want to replace the silicone pad for the A and B buttons. All right. We can just drop in the silicone pad here for the select and start buttons. There's also a little tiny pole that sticks through one of the holes on there. All right. Let's see here. Now we've got most everything set. Let's pull out that little piece of foam rubber, and now let's reseat our screen. So my display pops right into place pretty easily. Then the speaker needs to go into place, and now we situate all the main buttons. All right, that's feeling pretty good. Now we need to attach the left and right shoulder buttons. And this is where we might run into a little bit more problem. We need to make sure that the left and right shoulder buttons actuate with the new tactile switches, but I know that there's these other little nubs on the inside of the buttons which might prevent it from actually triggering. But here, let's see. I want to get everything set up here, except maybe we can have those buttons for last. So I'm going to put back in that little piece of foam. Actually, I'm going to pull that back out for now. I'm going to keep it till we finally close it up. And let's see if we can get the back of the enclosure on. Everything sounds like it's clicking into place pretty well. All right, we've got our X and Y buttons sticking out. Got our A and B buttons sticking out here. Our D-pad and our select and start buttons. Yeah, this all looks really, really good. Now we're just left with getting our L and R buttons in place so they can work. I'm going to just place my left and right buttons where they belong, and then I'm going to use the two little screws that we removed from the aluminum piece earlier. Yeah, this piece right here that was a part of the game holder section. Well, they're kind of extras right now, so we can use them for whatever we want. I'm going to use them here to hold the circuit board into place, and we've got two spots here on the very outside edge of the board that I can use for holding the main circuit board in place. I'm pretty sure I have the same option over here, but I've got two possible spots to put it. I'm going to put this one here, a little bit closer to the buttons. All of this is to really give us some good grip to make it feel like the system is when it's going to be completed. All right, let's slide the power switch in here again. And, all right, we'll get our lanyard over here and the non-lanyard side piece over here. Okay, everything's looking pretty good. Slide the top of the enclosure on. Now hopefully we'll be able to seat it in there with the left and right shoulder buttons. And the power switch. Come on, system. All right, Game Boy Advance. So yeah, check it out. Our left and right buttons work. Our A and B buttons are clicky. Our X and Y buttons are clicky. We've got our select and start button in play. All right, I think things are going really, really well. We're almost ready to power this guy on now. Again, full disclosure, I did power this board on before I started. Powering on the system, like plugging in the LCD and powering it on, probably should have been one of the first steps that I showed you here today, but mostly I'm focused on the assembly itself. But I'll tell you right now, this board and the display do work. I already tested it, and I have a little SD card, a 64 gig SD card that I have ready in order to load into the game system. So now that we know most of this is connected really well, the next step is going to be to put in that little light pipe that's going to sit here, and we can consider really closing this guy up for the last steps of testing. All right, hold on one second. Let's unscrew these two little screws in the board that I added for our testing. Put them off to the side. Okay, we'll lift everything out. Oops, careful with the display, not to put too much tension on the ribbon cable there. All right, well, I'm thinking that we're pretty much ready to rock here. So I'm going to take the light pipe and put that into place up top here. And that's going to go over top of these two LEDs that are on the circuit board. So I think I'm ready just to, oops, don't blow too hard, all the screws will go flying. blow off any additional dusty parts here. And I think I'm about ready now to try and close this whole process up. That means I'm going to be ready to now take off the cover for the LCD panel. I'm going to very gingerly remove that, and then I'm going to put it off to the side here, hopefully relatively clean. So now I'm going to try not to touch the surface of that LCD at all as we're doing this installation. Okay, everything kind of just falls into place, making sure that the light pipe is still located in the correct spot. Now let's slide in our left and right control buttons. Okay, that's looking good. Our bumper panels. Alright, everything's still looking really good. Now I'm going to take a little bit of that foam rubber. I'm going to tear it in half here. I'm going to fold it in half, and then I'm going to insert that in between the display and the board. And I'm going to just throw that other piece of foam that I tore off here in the bottom. Again, just as something to go between the display and the battery box. There shouldn't be a lot of pressure on this, but I'm really trying to keep it nice and comfortable. Right, so now what we'll do is we'll pick up the board a little bit, try to seat everything down comfortably. Alright, let me pop off actually these sides again and the L and R buttons while I screw down on these far sides using the short screws that we took earlier. Okay. You know, this is the time to be very patient and careful with the build. Don't put too much pressure on anything, especially as you're screwing things down. You don't necessarily need to screw anything super tight right now. We really want to just make sure everything is held in place while we finish the rest of the build. Okay, look how nice and dark that display panel looks. Oh, this is going to be glorious. You know what? I am always very careful with the display panel. So now that it's in the box, I'm just going to throw that cover back on there. So now we don't really have to worry about the display getting scratched up or dirty or anything now that it's in there. Hopefully this will be, you know, the durable build version of this particular CM3. All right, now let's go for, again, the shoulder buttons, the bumpers, and the power switch. And with all of that in place, now we'll slide over the back cover again. And, oops, it sounds like everything is in place. Wow. Oh, this is going to be so great. We now have our primary enclosure together. Now I'm not ready to totally seal this up yet, although I do have all the screws that I'm going to need to tighten it all down. We need to still hook up our batteries, of course, and then I think I want to throw on a heat sink. Here we go, to our processor chip. So I probably should pull the back off here one last time before we close it all up for good. I'm going to put the heatsink right here on the Broadcom chip. I'm going to have the fins oriented so they're going up and down. That way air can flow out of the game slot and hopefully actually cool the chip off. There's lots of debate over, you know, what kind of cooling really works with Raspberry Pi. If these little tiny heat sinks are worth the time, effort, or aluminum. I think that they're perfectly good to use, but I also don't have a heat-sensitive camera, so I can't prove how valuable they're really acting. There we go, we've got that in there now. All right, so I'm thinking that's all we need to worry about from inside the case. Now once again, carefully try to put it all back together. See if we can get all the parts to click into their spots. Make sure that the shoulder buttons are both working. The front buttons are working. The XY buttons are working. And once you think that you've got it, let's throw a couple screws in here. So now I've got a whole bunch of screws. I got screws that came with the CM3 kit. I've got screws that came with the enclosure. As I was talking earlier, there are tri-wing screws and there's Phillips head screws, and I was saying, oh, I could probably use some of the tri-wing. Oh, here we go. Here's a tri-wing screw right there. You can almost barely see it. I think that I'm going to just use the Phillips head screws today because I do anticipate I'm going to be taking this guy apart. I have a few other modifications that I'm going to be making to this Game Boy, including I'm going to be adding, just to share with you real quick, this little board, which is a USB hub, and this way I'll be able to wire in a permanent Wi-Fi USB dongle, and I might also make a second or a split USB port in order to have multiple controllers, but you know, not getting too far ahead of the build today. Now let's just pop in some screws and try to close out this whole build process. Let's slide in the batteries and try to get this whole system powered up. So I'm going to plug in my battery pack, you can see, into JST connectors. Ooh, I see some flashing lights on the circuit board, I guess acknowledging that there's battery power there. It's a tight fit. Okay, excellent. So the bottom battery is now in place. Take the top battery and similarly connect that up. Not a lot of room to work, so be very careful, and always be very mindful. Don't put pressure on these batteries, right? Don't want them to break, and you don't want to short them out at all. That would make a mess. Okay, and just seat them into place. Now, I'll slide each of the batteries into place. Try to snake their wires over out of the way. We don't want the battery wires getting gummed up in our whole process here. Alright, squish those batteries down. Not hard, but just, you know, fit them into the battery compartment. Click. Wow, that's really super smooth. Okay, and I guess now let's just try to power it on based on the batteries. Now, I didn't charge the batteries or anything. Nah, I guess that's not the smartest way to approach it. Here I have a USB power supply, and I'm going to plug it into a 2 amp 5 volt source, and we'll plug that into the USB charging port. There we go. Right on the back of the CM3 you can see a light turns on, and that means that it's charging those batteries. Now I'm going to flick the switch and hold it, and that should turn on the whole system, and a green light I think should come on. Let's see, there's the display, and there's the green light. I let go of the power switch, and now it's booting up. There's RetroPie, and it takes a couple seconds to boot up from a cold system into Emulation Station. Wow, actually that was really quick. Super cool. So let's see. I'll use the direction controls, and no, I don't see anything really happening for me right here. There we go. I'm able to move through RetroPie And oh, I guess I don't have any games on here right now, so there's no other menus or modes for me to have show up. I've got our main menu settings, other settings. I've got my quit and my shutdown system. I'll go back. If I hold in the switch or flick the switch for 5 seconds, it should go into a shutdown sequence. Let's see if that works. Oh, there we go. And there, our Raspberry Pi has shut down. Super cool. Here, let's peel off the display sticker here. And let's try to pop on our FreePlay Tech bezel. And we want to make sure that we don't gum up the screen at all. I think it's looking pretty good. I think it's in the right location, so I'm not going to have to do any changes to that later. Peel off the sticker backing, and as you can see, make sure you get the sticker off of the glass as well. When you place this, you know, it's only a one shot. At doing this, the glue is pretty sturdy, so try to get it right. There we go. All right. And here with the plastic still on top, I'm gently pressing it down. Oh yeah, that looks really great. Okay, let's try booting it up again. Like I said, hold in the power switch until the little green light comes on, and you can let it go, and it should boot up the rest of the way into RetroPie. So it's taken us about an hour and a half to go through each of these steps, to hollow out the shell and make room for all the components. There was a lot of fiddling with the whole process, right? Although it's very straightforward. I used a Dremel. Some people use a razor blade. I think it's all about the same in the end. Depends on what you're comfortable with. And if you have any other questions about this process, check out the FreePlay Tech website. They have a forum where a lot of users have built these devices. This is one of the first CM3 modules that I think have been built as a part of their Kickstarter campaign. And I hope to do a bunch more work with this CM3. Like I said earlier, I want to add in a USB hub so I can have onboard USB Wi-Fi and maybe a couple other components. I was talking to Ed about the possibility of doing a backlight modification so we can fade the backlight in or out, which I believe I'm actually set up to do now with a couple transistors and some resistors on the board near where the LCD display is connected. So I'll probably be doing a couple more videos where I go through that process. I also have been dreaming about adding an analog stick to the CM3 here, and we'll have to see how well the Nintendo 64 emulators and any other emulators that would actually necessitate having an analog stick would function before I invest too much time into that. But I hope you've enjoyed this walkthrough today on assembling the FreePlay Tech CM3. Thank you all so much. Bye-bye.